Good evening. My name is David Lee, and I am the Director of Education for the Dallas Historical Society. Founded in 1922, we collect, preserve, and exhibit the heritage of Dallas and Texas to educate and inspire present and future generations. For more information about the Dallas Historical Society and upcoming programs, please visit www.dallashistory.org. Welcome to an evening with Dr. W. Marvin Dulaney. He is the president of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. He serves as Deputy Director and Chief Operations Officer for the Dallas African American Museum. He has also served as a consultant on African and African American history with the Fort Worth and Dallas Independent School Districts, and as a guest curator for an African American history exhibition with the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission. He graduated from Central State University in Wilberforce, Ohio, earning his Bachelor of Arts in History, magna cum laude. He earned his Master of Arts and Doctor of Philosophy degrees in American and African American history at the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. Before retiring from teaching, Dr. Dulaney taught history for 42 years at 4 universities. He has published and edited 4 books. Please join me tonight in welcoming him to the Dallas Historical Society.
All right, people, good evening. And I say, all right, because wow, don't y'all have something better to do Thursday evening in this heat, coming out to see me, to put you to sleep? Wow, I don't know what to say about you. But seriously, I am honored to see all of you here, and especially pleased to see some of the people I've worked with over the years. Shaniqua Cummings is actually here for a second punishment, a second taste of, a bad lecture, because she was with me last Monday at the Old City Park. Wow, Shaniqua, I don't know what to say about you. Glutton for punishment. Then I got Don and Jocelyn Pinkert, who are 2 of the best presenters, tour guides in the city of Dallas. And of course, they also do Juneteenth. So if you need someone to come and lecture about Juneteenth, Don and Jocelyn, stand up, come on, so people can see you. And they're they do hidden history tours. Yeah, they do hidden history tours, and they do a wonderful job, and I recommend them all of the time. Because indeed, I'm about history. That's why I'm out here on a Thursday evening doing a lecture to a small crowd, because I think it's important that even though I have a small crowd, I'm going to give you the best information possible so that you can take this information and share it with other people. One of the good things about being here at the Dallas Historical Society is that they have some wonderful collections too. Part of my slide presentation comes from here. The John Leslie Patton collection, for example, is in the archive. They also have the patent for, the papers for the Hall of Negro Life. And the papers of Minnie Flanagan. You're going to see her in my PowerPoint presentation. So this is a great place in terms of preserving history. And again, if you're doing research on Dallas, particularly Dallas African American history, you want to come and take a look at the Minnie Flanagan papers, the John Leslie Patton papers, the papers of the Hall of Negro Life, and the Crawford papers. And let me not forget those, because I've looked at all 4 of those paper collections dealing with African American history. I came here 40 years ago. Okay? I came here 40 years ago. And what I confronted was some myths. As you see, the myths were, and I'm sorry, I guess I need to talk into the mic. The myths were there was no civil rights movement in Dallas. A civil rights movement was not needed in Dallas, Texas. There were no race riots or racial violence. Texas, and it was more Western than Southern. And the minor segregation that existed was resolved by black and white elites meeting to negotiate change in desegregating schools, public facilities, and housing. That was the myth that I confronted when I came here 40 years ago. And indeed, now, there was no real history, no real publications, no sort of civil rights history available on the city of Dallas at the time that I came. Since then, by the way, I've worked with a couple other colleagues, one Todd Moore from the University of North Texas, and we've published a book called Civil Rights in Black and Brown. So take a look at that if you ever get a chance. Anyway, the truth then, well, one of the persons who was perpetuating the myths, and again, I've been surprised that this book has gotten so much play and publicity over the past year since it's been republished in paperback, because it sort of perpetuates the myth that the elites or black leaders, sold black people out here in Dallas by, indeed, and I'm going to talk about that as a part of my presentation, but basically the thesis is that even though indeed he does go beyond the myth and talk about the racism and the terrible living conditions for African Americans in Dallas, but that the leaders resolved it by selling out the African American community, and that's not true. I wrote a book review about it in the Journal on the Southwestern Historical Quarterly in 1987, trying to point out some of the things that he missed about the movement here in Dallas, and also the fact that the book had no documentation, no footnotes, no sources, in terms of the conclusions that were drawn that literally, as I said, perpetuated some of the myth about civil rights in the city of Dallas. Anyway, here's some of the facts, though. As you see, Dallas was as segregated as any city in the Old South in all aspects of life: housing, employment, education, criminal justice. You might as well have been in Mississippi, in Alabama, if you lived here in Dallas and you were an African American. The Ku Klux Klan, Dallas had one of the largest chapters of the Ku Klux Klan, and this Klan dominated the cities in the 1920s until the Dallas Morning News took a stand. And that's why, to this day, I subscribe to the Dallas Morning News, because in the 20s, they took this stand against the Klan and helped to defeat the Klan, and indeed, literally, reduce their influence here in the city of Dallas. But anyway, racial violence was endemic, and I'm going to just show you a couple things. All right, then again, as you see, the African Americans in Dallas organized a chapter of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, in 1918 to address the ongoing racial discrimination that they face. So, this indeed shows you the map of where the Klan was prominent in the early 20th century. I put Alexander Johnson here. He was an young African-American man that worked at the Adolphus Hotel and bragged that he was having relationships with white women, so the Klan captured him, and a newspaper reporter dragged him down to the Trinity River, whipped him, and then, as you see, branded KKK on his head. So that was sort of an example of how, as I said, Dallas was basically a southern city with these type of attitudes. We know about this lynching. This slide, I took it from another publication, and the date is wrong. The date for the lynching of Alan Brooks was March of 1910. And as you know, we now have a marker there commemorating, or at least acknowledging, the lynching of Alan Brooks in 1910. All right, so these are just a few things I want to run through to show you that, yes, there was racism in Dallas. All right? I always tell the story that me and Harry Robinson, we bought this particular, this was in a framed item. We bought this piece, a sort of artifact. And I was so excited, and I was young and crazy, and when I was still teaching, and I copied and put it on my door at my office at UTA. Anyway, the chair got a complaint that there's a professor with a no dogs, no Negroes, and no Mexicans on the third floor of the building. So he calls me in, and he says, "Why do you have that sign on your door?" And I said, "Well, I'm actually just trying to show students what it was like. Obviously, I don't want no dogs and no Negroes, or that's not me. Because hell, I'm a Negro." So anyway, so he said, "Well, you need to take it down because you've gotten a lot of complaints about this sign on your door." And again, I just wanted to show you some of the segregation signs. Let me go back to this one. Well, let me go back to this one. Of course, this was at the State Fair, because as I said, I wanted to show that Dallas definitely needed a civil rights movement. Couldn't get away without having one. So again, lynching in Texas, of course, was just as endemic as it was in other parts of the South. As you see, Texas was actually the first when you add Mexicans to the mix. And of course, this is how disfranchisement and how sort of racial policies developed in Dallas, particularly in terms of voting. So I'm actually going to look at three things: voting, education, and housing, in terms of how African Americans had to fight for equality in those areas. So we're going to start with voting, because indeed the Democratic Party, and again, I know this is going to shock some of you, the Democratic Party in the early 20th century didn't want any Negroes. Now, if you know your American history, that you can go back before the Civil War and find out that the Democratic Party dominated American politics, and that the Democratic Party was, of course, dominated by the South, by Southern slaveholders. After the Civil War, it didn't change too much. It was so bad that if you voted for a Democrat in the late 19th and early 20th century, and you were an African American, you were considered to be a traitor to your race. Because indeed, as you see, they did not want any Negroes in their party, and they did everything that they could to block African Americans from participating in their primaries. In fact, their primaries were called, as you see here, white primaries, because only white people could vote in the primaries of the Democratic Party. And it was a Texas state law to keep African Americans from voting. Now, Dr. Lawrence A. Nixon, who founded and organized the first branch of the NAACP here in Texas, in El Paso, led the struggle to end the white primary in Texas. He won 2 cases, as you see, in 1927 and 1932. But as you see, in 1935, they lose a case, and the state, or the Supreme Court, basically allows the Democratic Party in the South, and particularly here in Texas, to declare that it is a private organization. And so as a private organization, it can determine who its members are, and literally, of course, block those who are not members from participating in their primaries. But we're going to see this is a struggle that goes on for 20 years to end the white primary in Texas. Now, these 2 individuals are very important. A. Maceo Smith comes to Dallas in 1932 to become the executive director of the Dallas Negro Chamber of Commerce. Maynard Jackson Jr. comes to Dallas, Maynard Jackson Sr. I shouldn't mix that up, because Maynard Jackson Jr. was the mayor of Atlanta for 3 terms. But anyway, Maynard Jackson Sr. comes home. He's born in New Orleans, goes to Morehouse, the University of Chicago, and of course becomes a minister, goes back to Morehouse in the early 30s to raise money and be the development officer for Morehouse, then comes back to Dallas in 1935 to replace his father as the pastor of New Hope Baptist Church. Now, he's progressive. He also leads the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, the IMA, which is a very powerful organization. The IMA is powerful all the way up until the 1960s in determining who the African American community would vote for. Now, one of the things that Jackson and Smith do is begin a campaign to organize the African American community politically. That is, they want people to get out and vote. Dallas was unique in one sense in that its local elections were nonpartisans. So African Americans could vote in local elections and in fact influence local politics. Again, they're still fighting that white Democratic Party primary, but locally they can have an impact. So you see this essay or editorial that Smith writes in 1935, literally telling people, if you're a good citizen, you got to register and vote. You just can't lay around and not participate in politics. Again, so as you see, he says, don't be a slacker. Register and vote. And of course, one of the things they also push is that you pay the poll tax, or they do poll tax payment campaigns. So at this time, the poll tax is $1.25. And by the way, I got these images right here at the Dallas Historical Society from the J. Leslie Patton collection. And as you see, Patton himself and his wife had paid their poll taxes. So they start a poll tax campaign in 1935. They do it again in 1936. And in fact, they literally do it every year. But it's these poll tax payment campaigns in 1935 and 1936 that are most important in terms of our story here. Now, one of the interesting things that happens is that in 1935, excuse me, Judge Sarah Hughes, who was actually a member of the legislature, resigns in order to become a federal judge. And as you see, she's actually swearing in Lyndon Johnson in November of 1922 after John F. Kennedy is assassinated. But she resigns, and it opens up her seat to any and everybody who wanted to run for it. One of the persons who ran for it was indeed Ammon S. Wells. Ammon S. Wells, who was who was an attorney and the local president of the NAACP. He decides to run for this seat. This is a bold move in 1935, that an African American is going to put his name forward in order to run for this seat, because there's this intimidation factor that still exists. There's still this factor that if you get out of line and become an uppity Negro, you get whipped or you get killed. You'll see in one of the articles here, let me see if I can, that the Ku Klux Klan threatens the Dallas Negroes if they vote for Ammon S. Wells. Because indeed this is off the chain. This is unheard of, that Ammon S. Wells is going to run for this seat and potentially win, because there were 60 candidates in the race. So indeed, if the African Americans voted as a bloc, he indeed could win, or could have won this race. He did not win. He finished sixth, though, but he got enough votes to show, though, that African Americans could affect elections. So one of the outcomes, downfalls, and challenges, well, hold on. Anyway, you see indeed that his running in the race sort of motivated people to vote. And of course, you see that Atlanta Daily World sort of carried the story to show that Ammon S. Wells had polled so many votes and actually had a chance of winning, even though he did. Now, going back to my previous statement, his running had a negative impact in that A. Maceo Smith and Maynard Jackson had applied and requested funds from the state legislature to build the Negro Hall of Life. And in fact, A. Maceo Smith was confronted by one of the local white politicians who said, you need to tell Wells to get out of the race, or we will not fund the Negro Hall of Life, or the Hall of Negro Life. And Smith refused to do it, And so they indeed revoked the funds for the Hall of Negro Life. Smith and Jackson then had to go to the U.S. Department of U.S. Commerce to get the $100,000 that eventually led to the building of this Hall of Negro Life, as you see, as a part of the Texas Centennial in 1936. Well, but they weren't discouraged. They decided to continue to push for political action. In 1936, they formed the Progressive Voters League, which becomes the most important black political organization in the city, in fact, in the state, because they formed branches of it in Houston and San Antonio. Yes? I can't hear you.
It begs the question, if he came in sixth,
Mm-hmm.
and in the political climate, and the people who were counting the votes, was there never any question about could it have been rigged against him? I mean, 1935?
Good question. Good question. Let's just say that the votes were so well distributed, and I don't mean in terms of them just being taken and distributed among the candidates, but the way the votes were distributed in terms of the returns, it didn't look like it had been rigged at all. Okay? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they formed the Progressive Voters League in 1936 to take action for African Americans. They want to address things like this white primary, but there's also some things here at home that they need to address. And by the way, let me just point out some people who are really significant. And this is Minnie Flanagan, of course, you know Jackson, and of course Smith. Up here is Dr. L.G. Pinkston here. And they will become important in terms of, well, there's almost everybody in this picture is important in terms of their impact and their participation in politics here in Dallas and bringing about change. So, let me, I'm going to stop because I'd have to go through the whole list. But anyway, they formed the Progressive Voters League, and because they have some serious issues they have to address. I talked about politics, of course, being the main problem, being the white primary. But by this time, they are in the middle of the Depression, well, actually, sort of in the latter stages of the Great Depression, and African Americans in Dallas are suffering. They're suffering from several things. One, housing. They didn't build housing projects for African Americans in the 1920s and 1930s. So the segregated housing for African Americans basically ran out. So that you had thousands of African Americans building shanties down on the Trinity River. Education. There was only one black high school in Dallas, which was Booker T. Washington, all right? And the Booker T. Washington, the one that's still downtown, by the way, was a facility built for 600 students. Well, some 1,600 students were attempting to go to school there, because what happens in Dallas when I say there's all these problems, is that the people come in from the rural areas of Texas, from Oklahoma, and from Louisiana to Dallas looking for jobs because of the Depression. And so indeed, African Americans coming here can't find jobs, can't find housing. They end up, as I said, with Booker T. Washington High School, having to go to school in 3 shifts. Okay, 3 shifts. I interviewed one of the students who went to Booker T. Washington High School in the late 30s, and basically he said, you know, I'm still pissed off. And I'm quoting him. He said, I'm still pissed off. And he said, you know, we're guaranteed in the state of Texas that we're going to get 6 hours of instruction every day. And I want my 6 hours, because all I got was 4 because of the overcrowding of Booker T. Washington High School. All right, so they lay out a strategy. The Progressive Voters League decide to do a poll tax payment campaign to affect the city election, the city council election of 1937. That was going to take place in April. And they're successful. They get 10,000 African Americans in Dallas to pay their poll taxes. But 7,000 of them vote in the election of April 1937, and they succeed in electing a political organization, white political organization, called the Forward Dallas Association. That actually defeats the Citizens Charter Association, which was another powerful political organization that I'll talk about later on, of sort of some of the white leaders in Dallas. That's the only time then that the Citizens Charter Association is going to get beaten by another group. With their victory, they indeed demand certain things. You see, again, Minnie Flanagan here, who at this time was still on the board. She will eventually become the president of the NAACP. But the Voters League helped the Fort Dallas Association to win that election, and indeed they had some demands that they wanted. They indeed wanted a new high school to deal with the overcrowding at Booker T. Washington. And then they got Lincoln. The city of Dallas built Lincoln High School, and it opens in 1939. They want housing. They get Roseland Homes, which of course is still there here in Dallas, just north of where we are. They get city jobs. So indeed, it's a victory for them, and they get some of the things that they want. But you see, that's what's unmet. They also wanted black police officers because of the congestion and the crowding and of all the people coming in from various places in Louisiana and Oklahoma and the rural areas of Texas. There's a major crime problem in Dallas. So they asked for black police officers. The city council in September of 1937 votes 7-2 to appoint the first black police officers to the Dallas Police Force. Guess what? Once that information was known, whites in the city of Dallas rallied and said, oh, no, we're not having Negroes on our police force. The leader of the Ku Klux Klan files a lawsuit to block it. The Dallas Pioneer Association rallies 10,000 whites in downtown Dallas at City Hall, protesting that this move by the city council to appoint black police officers. So that at the next meeting, the city council rescinds that vote and decides not to appoint the first black police officers in Dallas. I will show you this real quick to show you that it took another 12 years, another 10 years to get African Americans on the police force here in the city of Dallas. And as you see, these are the first two, Benjamin Thomas and Lee Brotherton. Well, one of the things that happens is that the NAACP, actually grows sort of concurrently with the Progressive Voters League in terms of its influence. I'm going to show why in a minute. But one of the persons who is recruiting is Juanita Craft. She joins the NAACP in 1935 and becomes one of the major recruiters, going out signing up people for the Dallas branch of the NAACP. She, of course, later would lead the Youth Council and, of course, start those protests at the Texas State Fair to get rid of what was called Negro Achievement Day. That is the only day that African Americans could attend the Texas State Fair. But this gentleman comes to Dallas in 1938 to deal with an issue. And it's sort of a unique issue. And it's a Dallas issue for sure. And he never leaves. And I say that sort of jokingly because he comes in 1938, and then he's in and out of Dallas pursuing court cases to improve the lives of African Americans here. So in 1938, George Porter here writes a series of articles in the Dallas Express, and you can go see these articles. They're there in August of 1938. He was relishing and celebrating the fact that he had been called to serve on a jury. He was excited about it. He said, because this is what citizens should do. This is your civic duty to serve on a jury. So he goes down to the Little Red Courthouse. He sits for 2 days. Now, the other African Americans who had been called, registered voters, left. basically they told the judge that they recused themselves and they left, which was actually what everybody who was black was supposed to do, but not George Porter. So on the third day, 5 white men decided, you know, we need to deal with this uppity Negro. So they throw him out of the courthouse head first, and it injures him. Local authorities do nothing about this assault on George Porter. So the local NAACP calls the national office, and Thurgood Marshall, as I said, comes here for the first time. He rides in on his white horse. He rides in on his white horse, takes his case, and gets the local federal, what they call the local federal marshal to arrest the 4 white men and prosecute them, and they get 4-year sentences in the federal prison in Kansas. And this is an amazing story, or an amazing thing to happen, because typically, you know, white men could assault black men and black people and walk away from it most of the time, as they did initially. But here's Marshall now, literally getting them prosecuted, these 4 men prosecuted and sentenced to 4 years in federal prison in Leavenworth, Kansas. So this is the first time he comes, and again, he helps then to promote the importance of the NAACP. He forms a team of lawyers here, with the main one being W.J. Durham. He becomes sort of the lead local attorney on many of these cases that we know about. And so they take on, for example, that white primary case that I talked about. They win it. Finally, in 1944, the Supreme Court, again, with Marshall and Durham making the argument, strikes down the white primary in Texas in a case called Smith versus Allwright. And this, of course, is Lonnie Smith, who was the plaintiff in the case. Now, this case, again, that originates here in Dallas, even though the plaintiff is in Houston, this case reverberates across the South, so that the white primary in Mississippi, the white primary in Florida, the white primary in Alabama, the white primary in South Carolina, the white primary in Georgia are all struck down because Marshall and W.J. Durham won this case in Texas. As I said, it reverberates across the South, striking down white primaries and allowing African Americans to participate in the Democratic Party's primary. And guess what? It changes the Democratic Party, because now they have to deal with African Americans. They can't be these racists. Well, I'll go down, that's all I'll say about them. They can't be these racists that they have traditionally been that prevented African Americans from voting and participating in the primary. So as you see, this case is important, yeah, and it's called a historical decision, taking place on April 1st of 1944. And indeed, as I said, one of the most important cases ever ruled on here in Texas, because, as I said, it had this almost a national impact in terms of changing or ending the white primary. Now, one of the things that happens is that Maynard Jackson decides to run for the school board in 1944. And he gets a lot of African American support, but he loses, of course, 3-1. And he primarily loses because the Supreme Court rules on the Smith case on the same day that the election takes place here in Dallas. And so he's just overwhelmed. But once again, he does something that African Americans aren't supposed to do. He runs for the school board. He ends up, as a result of running for the school board, being harassed and threatened by whites in Dallas. They are calling his house, telling him what's going to happen to him and his family. So in January of 1945, he leaves Dallas. and he goes to Atlanta. And as you know, the rest is history. His son, who grew up here in Dallas, at least partially, goes on to become the first African-American mayor of Atlanta. Now, one of the other important persons working with the NAACP was, of course, Charles Hamilton Houston. And I cite him, even though he's out of Washington and D.C., and he's with Howard University, and of course he becomes the first general counsel of the NAACP. I cite him because he sort of lays out a plan that affects Texas. You see, the plan, of course, was this three-pronged strategy to attack segregated education in the South. And as you see, the first case is about transportation for African-American students in South Carolina. It is called Briggs versus Elliott. This is sort of the origin of Brown versus Board of Education. Now, recently, a friend of mine in South Carolina who runs a civil rights museum in Orangeburg, South Carolina, said that they had filed a motion to rename Brown Briggs versus Elliott. Why? Because initially, once the representatives and senators of South Carolina saw that this case was going to be Briggs, because it's again a South Carolina case with a long history and background, by the way, they indeed convinced the court to change the name, because it's supposed to go by Briggs because it goes alphabetically. And of course, Briggs comes before Brown. But Strom Thurmond, I hope you know that name, who was a senator from South Carolina at that time, convinced the Supreme Court Chief Justice to call it Brown. So as I said, my friend in Orangeburg, they filed the motion to get it changed back, or to make the name of the case Briggs, based on the fact that Briggs was the lead case. One of the things, of course, is that Charles Hamilton Houston proposed in this three-pronged strategy was to equalize the salaries of African-American teachers with those of whites. And I'm going to show you Thelma Page. Then, of course, the other thing was to provide African-American students graduate and professional training schools. Again, as you know, the schools are segregated from kindergarten to college in the South. So here in Texas, you could go to Prairie View A&M. Eventually, you could go to Texas State College for Negroes, or excuse me, Texas State University for Negroes, TSUN. But you could not go to the University of Texas, and you could not go to Texas A&M. And of course, Prairie View did not have a law school nor a medical school. So if you were an African-American student, you had to go out of state. The state of Texas tried to deal with that by indeed starting a scholarship to send Negroes out of the state for law school and medical school and hope that they don't come back. Yeah, so L.A. Bedford, who I mentioned earlier as one of those students at Booker T. Washington who didn't get all of his education, ends up going to New York under this scholarship and getting a law degree in New York at Manhattan Law School, Brooklyn Law School. And so this is how the state of Texas was going to deal with, again, the third prong, of this plan by Charles Hamilton Houston. So indeed, Richard T. Hamilton, who is, by the way, is in that picture of the Progressive Voters League, proposed that the state of Texas earmark funds for black students to go out of state. And I often laugh, and when I used to teach this, I used to say, today, if you earmark anything for black students, there'll be hell raised, okay? But here we see in 1939, they're willing to give as much money as needed to get rid of those uppity Negroes who want to be doctors and lawyers. But anyway, going on. So here in Dallas, Thelma Page files a lawsuit to equalize her salary with that of the white teachers in the Dallas public schools. And of course, she wins. Marshall and Durham win her case. It's a what did I say? It's not even a contest. It's no contest. Because when you look at it, she's got a master's degree, yet she's making less than most of the white teachers who had bachelor's degrees. So this is the case then of winning, using again the courts to end segregation in Texas, specifically in Dallas. You all know the Heman, Marion Sweat case. This is of course the case that's in the Teeks. But as I said, the case that really should be in the Teeks, even before this one, is Smith. But we'll go with this because indeed this is another case that Marshall and Durham takes and wins in 1950. That is to get him into the University of Texas Law School, if you didn't know the case. They even created, and this is outside of Dallas, even though once again it sort of originates in Dallas because A. Maceo Smith is talking with Lulu White in Houston about how do we find a plaintiff to file a lawsuit against the University of Texas Law School. And of course, Lulu White eventually finds Heman, Marion Sweat. And of course, then Marshall and Durham take his case. And again, it's a little bit more complicated than what I'm saying, but basically this case starts in Dallas once again, and Sweat ends up being the beneficiary of everything that happens. Now, you heard me mention TSUN earlier. The state of Texas, I always used to tell my students, always tries to do things bigger and better than any other place. Going back, just one or two, you see the second part of the headline. Fears the Gaines decision. The Gaines decision was a case won in Missouri by Charles Hamilton Houston that forced the University of Missouri Law Schools to integrate and to take in Lloyd Gaines in 1938, or to admit Lloyd Gaines in 1938. So you see, Texas was afraid that the same thing was going to happen here, that they're going to be forced to accept African-American students at the University of Texas Law School and in the University of Texas, period. So they indeed were trying to get around that by putting this money up to send students out of state. Then, of course, with Sweat, when they do get the challenge, as I said, they decided to do everything, to do things bigger and better than what had happened in Maryland, what had happened in Missouri, by building a law school from scratch for Negroes. And they start with converting Harris County College for Negroes into TSUN and investing $100,000, in fact, I think it was a lot more than that, in creating this new university, Texas State University for Negroes in Houston, and attaching a law school to it so that Sweat could go there rather than the University of Texas Law School. And of course, Sweat refused, but they kept it anyway. And again, so TSU, Texas State University for Negroes, you all know what it became, right? Texas what?
Texas Southern.
Texas Southern. And what's the name of the law school? The Thurgood Marshall School of Law. So we see some good things came out of that. We got an African-American law school in Houston. All right, back to Dallas. I told you I was going to talk about housing. Well, the Forward Dallas Association, as I said, did create 2 housing projects. I'll get to the other ones in a minute. But one of the things that they did resulted in African Americans moving close to white neighborhoods, and in fact, encroaching on some white neighborhoods near Lincoln High School. All right, everybody know where Lincoln is, right? And by the way, you don't know where Lincoln is? If you go out the door, and I'm teasing you, take that road all the way down and make a right and go about another mile and you'll run into Lincoln High School. Okay. So, and again, keep in mind, this used to be an all-white area. South Dallas used to be an all-white area. So when African Americans began moving in this area to get close to Lincoln High School, this is the result. All right, their homes being bombed. And the city basically bought these African Americans out and moved them out of this area to indeed stop them from being harmed by the racists in the area. And so, but the encroachment continues so that, as you see here, South Dallas eventually becomes majority African American, and Forest Avenue High School. Everybody know where Forest Avenue High School is? Where is it? Okay, it's Madison High School. It used to be Forest Avenue. When it became black, they changed the name to Madison, and they took all the trophies and memorabilia out of it. All right, so this happens again, though. This happens again as this encroachment continues. In 1950, there's more bombings that take place. All right? This time, they go another step. They go a step further in terms of dealing with housing. They create Hamilton Park, which becomes sort of the fourth African-American housing area. And as you see, they have Rosen Homes, the dates for these African-American projects. Rosen Homes, Frazier Courts, Edgar Ward Place, and then, of course, eventually Hamilton Park, named for Dr. Richard T. Hamilton. And he sure did, yes. All right.
I understood, I always heard that Hamilton Park was a subdivision that Hamilton bought the land. That's what I always heard.
He's dead. He's dead in.
I had always heard he had bought the land just for African Americans to move in.
No, that's another individual, not Richard T. Hamilton. No, he's dead by the time they do. Yeah, so just name it after him, but he has nothing to do with it. I'm going to actually show you, or at least give you the name of the person who bought the property and laid it out. Yeah. Uh-huh. All right. So housing continues all the way to 1968. I always liked this slide because, you know, here, when I first came to Dallas Cowboys were like saints. And for this brother not to be able to find an apartment just blew me away in 1968. Plus, they had passed the 1968 Fair Housing Act, which was allegedly stop the discrimination in housing in 68. But here's Don Perkins, Cowboy fullback, can't find a place to stay in Dallas. Now, they resolved this issue with him I'll tell you who resolves it. Roger Staubach. By the way, Roger Staubach is in the Black Sports Hall of Fame at the African American Museum. Only one of two whites in the Hall of Fame, or the Black Hall of Fame. And Staubach, good guy, basically helped the black players to find jobs in the off season. Eventually helps Don Perkins to find an apartment and solves this issue. Again, today we think of these players who are millionaires, they shouldn't have any problem finding anything or finding jobs in off season because they don't need to work in off season. But in the 60s, they indeed did not make enough money to not work in the off season and when they were not playing. And so Roger Staubach helped the Cowboys, black Cowboys, to find jobs and, as I said, solve this issue for Don Perkins. All right, we're going to move back to education. Okay, we've done housing, we've done politics. We're going to move back to education, which is really in terms of what happens after the Brown decision or the Briggs decision. It's really bad in Dallas. W.T. White, who was the superintendent at the time, basically stated after the Brown decision, we are not integrating, okay? So in 55, they have to file another lawsuit to force the school district here to integrate. But still, nothing happens. Plus, you have these local federal judges who are racist. And excuse me, I'm going to use this because this is what they were, and assholes. Okay? So they allow the school district to come up with these subterfuges that you see at the bottom. Well, the salt and pepper plan, for example. Atwell approved the salt and pepper plan, okay, for integrating the schools here. What was that? Well, the school district came up with a plan that the only way a black student could go to a white school was if a white student agreed to go to a black school, okay? Salt and pepper. That's what they call it. So a black student couldn't go to a white school unless he could find a white student willing to go over to a black school. So guess what happened? Nothing. Then they came up with the legacy plan. Davidson approved the legacy plan. And it's just pure craziness. Basically, it said that a black student could not go to a white school unless he had a sibling or he or she had a sibling that went to a white school. So what happened? Nothing. Because indeed, it's a subterfuge. Finally, they get to the stair-step plan. These are out of order, okay. So finally, they get to the stair-step plan. And again, Davidson approves this plan too. So, the plan was designed for integrating the schools a grade a year. So, you start with first grade, and you bring in some black students to integrate a white school. They're promoted to the second grade. Then you bring in some more behind them into the first grade. And then when they get promoted, those two classes get promoted, going to second graders, going to third, you bring in some more for first grade. All right? So you've integrated 3 grades now in 3 years. So basically, this stair-step plan is going to take 12 years in order to integrate the schools. And of course, it's eventually thrown out by the Fifth Court of Appeals and as nonsense. And again, finally, Davidson and Atwell retired. Some of you may know some local African Americans renamed Atwell when they found out what a racist he was. Atwell Middle School in Oak Cliff, after they found out how much of a racist he was and his rulings in this school desegregation cases. So as you see the grade of the year plan. All right, let me go back. Right. If you can call it that. Okay. Now this is what Schutze writes about. This is allegedly how black people were sold out in 1960. In March 1960, Roy Wilkins, who was the executive director of the NAACP, came to Dallas and spoke to the Dallas Citizens Council, which of course is this powerful group of white men, corporate leaders, bankers, and so on. And they were worried because, again, Dallas is affected by national events. The sit-in movement has started February 1st, 1960, by North Carolina A&T students in Greensboro, North Carolina, and it spreads across the South, so much so that 60,000 students participate in sit-ins all across the South. It comes to Dallas, yes. Some SMU students sit in March of 1960. So the Citizens Council is concerned. Are we going to have this violence and disorder that we saw in other places in the South with sit-ins, and of course also with school desegregation? New Orleans and Little Rock were the examples. New Orleans and Little Rock were the 2 places that they did not want to replicate when they began to desegregate schools. So after Roy Wilkins basically said to the Citizens Council, y'all need to start integrating now. Don't wait, do something. So the Citizens Council started the Committee of 14 with 7 African Americans and 7 whites to begin the process of negotiating desegregation, all right? That is, the white members would go to Kresge's downtown, go to the Adolphus downtown and say, y'all gotta let black people in, because we say so, and we got the power to force you to do it. Then the black members would go to the Dallas Community Committee and say to them, go down to Kresge's, go down to the Adolphus and see if you can get in. Do the testing. The white members have told us that these places are integrated. Let's go and see, and then report back to us if it hasn't happened. So indeed, this was sort of a coordinated process where the white members, again, of this Committee of 14 would use their power and authority to force places to integrate.
You said these are places that were claiming could allow blacks into, and they wanted to prove that they couldn't? Is that it?
No. They want, well, yes, you got it right. That, for example, Kresge's has a lunch counter, and the white members have told the black members that Kresge's has agreed to allow blacks to come in and have lunch. Then, of course, African Americans would go down to Kresge's to see if that's true. Okay, and then if not, they'd come back.
As opposed to Piccadilly, that they didn't allow here.
Right, right. So actually, they're trying to integrate all of these stores and lunch counters downtown. Again, using the authority of the Citizens Council, so some of the most powerful white men in the city. And again, I'm glad you interrupted me. This is the gentleman who bought the property to create Hamilton Park. He's a banker. And so he bought that property up in northeast Dallas to create Hamilton Park. All right. They also set up a plan too to integrate the schools. So, in fact, let me just go back real quick. So, and I'm missing something, but I'm going to show it in a minute. They decide that they're going to get out ahead of integration. So they publish Dallas at the Crossroads, and they produce 50,000 copies of it. Basically, it's a little brochure that says, hey, don't be stupid and don't be a jackass going down there and harassing these black students who are trying to integrate the schools. You know, act like you're a human being and treat them like they're human beings. Don't make Dallas look bad like New Orleans and Little Rock. And it works. They bring in, as you saw, they bring in Walter Cronkite, who does a video. You can actually see that video. It's on YouTube. So indeed, they work this plan. They have meetings all across the city using Dallas at the Crossroads as a talking point, and it works. So much so that when these students integrate the schools in Dallas in 1961, nothing happens. Nobody's beat up. There's no jackasses spitting and calling the students N-words. They indeed control it. And of course the police are also ready to arrest and I keep using this because that's what they were, to arrest the jackasses if they got out of line. So integration was accomplished. All right, I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
We really appreciate you being here tonight and helping us better understand the history of civil rights in Dallas, Dr. Dulaney. Thank you all for being here this evening. Our next lecture will be next month on the 20th, when Dr. Lloyd Uglow will be here to talk about the defense of Texas in the 1800s on the frontier. So thank you so much. For more information about other programs and about what we do here at the Dallas Historical Society, please visit our website. Have a great evening, everyone.